Hello and welcome to Field Talk, a Monitor Farm Scotland podcast. Monitor Farm Scotland is farmer-led and farmer-driven and aims to encourage discussion and solution-based thinking within the industry. I'm Mark Stevens. In this episode, we're going to be looking at succession planning and family dynamics because, as you know, farming is an odd game. It's practically the only sphere where your place of work is also where you raise your family. There can be several generations of that family working in the same place at the same time, all totally convinced that their way of doing whatever it is the right way. That means that aside from the usual stresses and strains of any business, there's also a lot of emotion tied up in farming. Family tensions, potential conflicts. Things have a habit of getting personal. Basically, it's a bit of a minefield, and it is amazing. Scary, really, how often families don't talk about the future. They just bury their heads in the sand and hope it'll be all right in the end. Now, to help address some of these issues, to give farming families tools to deal with them, a really interesting series of workshops is coming to Scotland. It's called Undiscussabull, and they're hosted by Canadian experts Elaine Froese and Lydia Carpenter. Elaine's a farmer. She's also a certified coach and author, a go-to expert for farming families who want to find out how to communicate better and resolve any conflicts they might have to secure a successful farm transition. Lydia's also a farmer and has worked with hundreds of farm and ranch families across Canada and the USA as a professional facilitator and mediator. Now, they've both got a list of qualifications as long as your arm, but all you really need to know is that they understand farming and that they are very good at what they do. And I'm delighted to say they join me now. First question to you, Elaine. Where does that workshop name come from, Undiscussabull?
So Undiscussabull is Undiscussabull, B-U-L, which is the bull in the middle of the room of every farm. A bull that everybody knows it's there, but they're not willing to talk about, much like people would say there's an elephant in the room. And this came as a derivative of my studies at the Hudson Institute in Santa Barbara when I was a beginning coach way back in 2003. So Discuss the Undiscussable is the tools that our coaching practices use to help people talk about tough issues in transition.
Why do families find succession planning so hard?
I'm first generation, Mark, on our farm, and I started our business with my husband who immigrated from South Africa when he was 15 years old. We didn't start farming until our early 20s, and one of the things that we really focused on when we started farming was access to land, as you would imagine, access to capital, and a lot of the agronomic and production sides of agriculture. And when we started to get involved with more peers and we were engaged in conversations around farm management, we realized that a lot of what was happening is people were unable to talk about the tough issues, like Elaine mentioned. I think transition people find difficult to approach is because it is very large. It's a complex thing. And there's often many layers. And so there is the management side, and then there also is the people side. And farming in particular, I think a lot of people are focused on the management side and the production side, and the communication and people side kind of gets left. So once we kind of got our bearings around access to land and running a profitable business, I felt like this was kind of like a new frontier in agriculture. It was communication and conflict resolution. And almost, when I'm talking with farmers, I say it's kind of the human resources side of agriculture that we're kind of trying to embark on here. And business transition for any business is challenging. Agriculture has a lot of other stressors and factors, and it's a family business. So there's a lot of other factors that farmers and ranchers have to deal with. Yeah, I think it's just the nuance and the family dynamics that make it particularly challenging and difficult.
Are there particular things, Elaine, that farming families do, a sort of, cultural habits that can cause particular difficulties?
So one of those things I think, Mark, is their mindset around conflict. And I always say quite often that conflict avoidance and procrastination is killing agriculture. So in the transition story, people come to us and they say, Elaine, we don't know how to get started. And we're super afraid of stirring up the pot or having lots of conflict in the process. And the mindset shift that needs to happen all over the globe is that conflict is not bad. There's positive conflict behavior, such as reaching out, putting yourself in the other person's perspective and expressing emotion. which are the tools that we teach in these workshops to help people understand that you need to get to the table to have a conversation and find out what people are thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting. And as Lydia said, the complexity is the transition or succession is the change in labor, which happens, of course, when young farmers come back and they have good backs and great energy. But there's also the transition for management, which Lydia mentioned. But then the third piece is the transition of ownership. And we understand last year we were in the UK doing 5 seminars, and now Lydia will be in Scotland and I'll be coming in from abroad. The whole overwhelm and anxiety is that pain of not knowing any certainty for the future. And that's what families are just stuck with.
You can understand, Lydia, why people don't want confrontation. They don't want to address that conflict. But give me an example. Don't name names, obviously, but how costly can it get not addressing this?
Oh, well, and so first, I would say, and Elaine and I have said this many times, conflict is not a bad thing. You can be in good conflict. And I think that's where people are potentially missing the skills, or they have a history in their dynamic or in their family of what we would consider to be destructive conflict behaviors. So conflict avoidance is a destructive conflict behavior. It doesn't get you towards resolution. Well, people might feel like, you know what, I'm not going to talk about this, and therefore it's going to go away, or at least I don't have to address it, or I'm not going to be the creator of this conflict. That avoidance is a contributor. We have had examples where families have come into business together, and that kind of happens that can happen quite organically because you're there, you're working, like Elaine said, you have a transition of labor, you kind of come into the management, and sometimes the transition of ownership can happen a little bit haphazardly. Like you may not have a unanimous shareholders agreement, for example. You may transfer shares in your company without having a really robust conversation about the what ifs. And that's often, like, folks are often coming to us sometimes to be proactive, to say, look, we've got a next gen that's quite, like, they're keen and they're in their 20s and they're ready. We want to make sure we have these conversations early and often, which is great. So they're approaching it from a proactive business risk management strategy. We've also had situations where folks are coming in a little later where they may need, at this point, an off-ramp, like somebody wants to leave the company or the business and they don't have an agreement. So they came in without an agreement and now they need to exit, and now there's conflict or there's tension or there's things that have not been addressed. And that's why often we talk about this, it's complex because we're listening to people one-on-one to hear, like, what is the story? Like, what is happening? How did you get here and where do you want to go from here? So sometimes we need to understand on the business side, how did you get here? And then on the emotional factors, how did you get here and why are you stuck in this place?
Clearly, you're spending a lot of time unpicking bad forward planning. If you were starting from scratch, you were starting with a clean slate, what should the main aims, Elaine, of good succession planning be? What are you working towards?
First of all, you're working towards what each individual is needing. And so I'll use my own family as an example. So we have a 5,000 acre grain farm in southwestern Manitoba, 16 miles from the US border. Our son is 37. And I, as a Hudson coach, am very clear, and Lydia will present this, and I will talk more about it too in the seminars, about in your 20s, it's about independence. In your 30s, it's about mastering success. In your 40s, it's about having legacy control over your future. So having some degree of equity and future. So you'll have 40-year-old Scottish farmers listening to this, and they're going, oh, Elaine, she's talking about me. Because my mom and dad are in their mid-60s and they just will not let go. They don't even want to talk about it. And they'll say, we just want to, let this all be sorted out when we're gone. Well, that's not being proactive. So in our case with our son, he's 37, which means he's approaching 40 and needs security and equity for his own family. And so he's already bought a portion of our seed business and the seed cleaning plant. And that is now his entity where he's growing equity. But my husband has not left the farm. And so that's for the 60 plus farmers listening to this. I want the Scottish farmers to start thinking about what does it look like to step back on your Highland farm without stepping away. And so what successful transition looks like is each person in the family, whether they're involved in the farm business or not, is very clear about what their outcomes need to be on the family circle side, but also what the vision is for the farm. And the process we use in our coaching practice is for everyone, whether they're heirs of the farm or not, whether they're successors of the farm or not, that as a family dynamic, they all understand what mom and dad as the founders are needing and wanting. And I'll be doing a piece on the seminars on finding fairness, which talks about income streams, housing, and the whole issue of fairness. And so in our family dynamic, we've had a great succession plan with our son because it's not done, it's ongoing. And so as we age in place on our farm, we will continue to meet with accountants around tax strategies, but there's already been a transition mark. And that's the other thing. This is not an all or nothing process. This doesn't happen on one magical day and it's done. This is what I call an unfolding. As you keep going through the business and through the family dynamic and keep unfolding what everybody's needs are and how they're being met, and quite frankly, how roles are changing, because my husband no longer answers the home phone. Our home phone, our landline, is call forwarded permanently to our son because that's the number that older people would use to buy seed from us. And so it's also about changing roles and identity, Mark, because my husband is no longer the main manager, but he is and always will be a collaborative decision maker. And you see, that's the other thing about transition that we'll be talking about is how do you make decisions in your family? And our goal as coaches is that those decisions would be made collaboratively and that people would have agency over the roles and skills on the farm. My husband's not a mechanic, so we have a mechanic on our farm. I am not a bookkeeper. I did not take the traditional role of being the person or the woman doing the books. And so we're very clear that people who do well in farm succession are aligned with what the vision is for the farm. They have a business plan. They use outside advisors, but most of all, they have a really good system for communicating well with each other.
So clearly the first step in this is to open up communication. But how do you improve that communication, Lydia? I mean, how do you train people to communicate better?
There needs to be some degree of willingness. And I have worked with families where we have worked together for years. So they use facilitation as a tool. And some of these folks, they come in with a very high degree of angst and in fact, quite poor communication and conflict resolution skills. And the first thing that I like to articulate to folks is like, this is a meeting. Like we're going to have a meeting as a family. This is not the transition meeting. And then we're going to hand you a document that's a prescription of like how you're going to do this. We're going to have a meeting and find out what's important to folks. If there is clearly issues with communication, really challenging issues often with communication, we need to be open to addressing what those are. And so sometimes we're in facilitation and they might be interrupting each other. Elaine's got her bowl. You can't see this. I have a whole series of stuffed things that are talking sticks. So we will use all kinds of tools to change the dynamic. Yeah, like honestly, the more embarrassing, sometimes the better. Like I'm looking for additional embarrassing stuffed animals if anyone out there has any or any suggestions, because it's
I'd like a Highland cow, just FYI.
We can sort the Highland cow out. Don't worry about that aspect of it. But the stuffed strawberry, I'm struggling to see how you can top that.
Part of it is a disruption. I have worked with folks where they say, look, our issue is that we just need a plan. We just need someone who understands farming, who can just tell us like what we need to do with the cows and what, and that is certainly often the case where like that is part of it. The first thing is that you need to be able to talk and sit and communicate about these things and stay in the room. And so sometimes when we're facilitating, the first thing is just to bring people together, to feel what it's like to be together and to see, can we stay in the room? And I have facilitated for folks, Mark, where sometimes the feedback that Elaine and I will receive is that's the first meeting where we've had where no one has walked out. And it's because changing the dynamic can actually have a quite a significant impact. And people have to have some degree of willingness. And I have worked with folks who they have a lot of challenges around conflict and communication. If they are willing, they are able to make some steps forward. And in some cases, when we do our facilitation, ideally we're working with, I say ideally because we want all voices, but ideally we're hearing from everybody, then we're coming together to facilitate a meeting. There are sometimes people who don't want to participate. They're not ready. They may be willing and ready in the future, maybe months down the road or weeks down the road. And so we keep that option open for folks as well. I think too, sometimes there's this feeling that I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to talk about my feelings. We're not providing, like, we're not therapists, right? So we're not providing group therapy. Sometimes the modality might feel a little similar. We're using talking sticks. We're asking people what they're thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting, or what's concerning for them. We're also approaching this strategically. So what tools do we have available in our toolkit that can help you figure out role clarity? Or we have a compensation worksheet we use. Sometimes people will say to us, I've been working on this farm for 20 years. I haven't been paid anything. I don't have any equity. I don't own my home. I don't know what the future is. And so we have tools that can help people, because ultimately we're holding people capable, Mark, that they can do this. And sometimes we also recognize that the complexity of it is so overwhelming. Sometimes people just don't have the tools.
Quite often they'll say, this is the first time that somebody has actually listened, heard me, and really understands.
It's interesting what you're saying about it being similar to therapy, but not therapy, because sometimes I would imagine you're probably going to have to be very sensitive here, the when you die type of conversation. And again, I'm guessing here that sometimes you're probably going to have to be pretty blunt.
Well, that would be the Irish in me. I didn't tell you about that part. I am a Highland dancer and I can do the Highland fling, but my mother is of Irish descent. And again, that's another thing I think that people appreciate about the way we work, is that there's no judgment here, but we also come from a lot of curiosity, which is one of the tools we use to really drill down on what is the story that people are telling themselves. And the other sadness I have is I have families who call me 2 years later and say, oh, Elaine, when we did that discovery call with you and Lydia, I'm so sorry we didn't engage then, because now we're in a real pickle. And so there's also regret and remorse about things that could have been that weren't, because they just didn't act. And that's that procrastination factor raising its ugly head again. And so we always say counseling is about recovery. So we do have the National Farmers Mental Health Alliance here in Canada and Do More Ag Foundation. And we do see, Mark, more and more farm families engaging in therapy. So I'll tell you a story about a family I coached who said, Elaine, we're going to use your services, but before we do, we have some emotional baggage we want to work on getting better skills around. So they went to therapy first, Mark, and then they came to coaching. So we say counseling is about recovery, coaching is about discovery. And I think the other thing I want your listeners to hear very clearly is every morning you wake up and you have choices. And we have tools to help you make better choices and to activate those conversations and to be clear with each other and to get clarity of what the future is going to look like. Because so many people are sad and maybe even having a low-grade depression and mental health struggles because they can no longer live in this pain and this anxiety of not knowing certainty for their future of their family and the future of the farm. And that's for every generation that's involved.
This is just curiosity on my part, but when you have these initial meetings, how do you set them up? I mean, do you do them around the kitchen table? Do you go to neutral ground? Does it vary family by family?
It depends. There are a couple of things that are important. We do this virtually on Zoom and we do it in person as well. The process, and I often tell people, it's not prescriptive. So we can change the process that everybody feels safe, or that we have some location that feels more neutral. We do the one-on-ones first, just to listen to everyone, just to kind of understand where they're at. And then we can kind of have a sense also of what the dynamic is. Maybe having it in the farm shop is not a great idea. And there can be reasons for that, right? There could be a place of argument. There could be a power dynamic in that environment that's not conducive to having a constructive facilitated meeting. So speaking one-on-one with everybody, we do that individually or as couples. We don't prescribe that. We let people decide, although we can provide some insight into why it might be helpful to do it on your own or with your spouse. When we're facilitating meetings, if we're doing it through Zoom, I tell people you can either do it from your own home or you can find a space that works for you in person. In our process, I mean, Elaine, you can comment on the kitchen table, but there's a reason we don't do that. And that is because everyone kind of will assume their seat. And so I have done, I mean, just depending on people's ability to move around or accessibility, but if I've had it at people's homes, we've done things like we've decided, collaboratively, where are we going to sit? Like I've had people sit on the carpet on their kitchen floor, or on their living room floor. I've had people set up a table outside under a canopy, which they would have not ever done, to make it feel different. We can also find neutral spaces, so we have, booked locations to have these meetings. But again, for me, Mark, I have certain things that I like to do as a facilitator. Like I do not like long boardroom table meetings because those already have a kind of power structure attached to them culturally. So we try to change the environment. And I was just going to comment, we have another colleague that does this work on Australia, Elizabeth Knight. Elaine did a podcast interview with her as well. And she even talked about lighting, like making sure the windows are in the right place so that you've got enough light coming in, and certain things that we consider as facilitators to make the room feel open and conducive to communication and participation.
And Lydia and I also had a great conversation with the founder, shoulder to shoulder, as we were in his pickup truck, driving through his livestock and checking his livestock. So the term meeting may also strike fear into people as to, well, what's going to be discussed. So through that coaching process, we get all kinds of information when we do that pre-work one-to-one, and everything we do is confidential. So we're not going to relay from one family member, oh, did you know your dad is thinking this? Or did you know no, that is not happening. So when we get them together, and typically on Zoom, Lydia and I will co-facilitate, which is really good because we can work together as a team. And we also have meeting notes up on the screen. And if we were doing it in person, I would be there with my flip chart, my handy dandy flip chart, because visually people can attack the issue that's on the paper or on the notes, and it helps keep them in track as to really understanding who said what and why they're saying what they're saying.
Is it easier to do it face to face? Because I would imagine if you're going into a family situation, you're trying to do all sorts of things. You're trying to get basic information, yes, but you're also trying to assess what their values are, how they make decisions. How do they actually behave with each other?
Well, we're pretty good at reading body language through Zoom, but obviously I would think, and Lydia has been traveling into Saskatchewan, and I've been working in the US with families when I happen to be speaking in Montana or other places. And face-to-face would be the ultimate, Mark. But we're a global company now. On our membership site, we have a woman from the UK who's a member, and a woman from Scotland was a member. And the work that we do is it's the message is being heard globally. And so this digital opportunity to at least get the conversation starting. And like Lydia said, she's now working with some families in year 3, and all the work's been done on Zoom. But ultimately, the family at some point wants to even come and meet with Lydia face to face to have even more robust understanding. So it can be a hybrid model as well.
My thought is there's a lot of benefits to doing this in person. I have also worked with groups who do not feel initially safe. I mean, that's their wording, right? They don't feel comfortable to do it in person. And so the Zoom option can be an icebreaker for that. So we can use Zoom so that they can have a conversation. They're in their own environment, and then we can work towards a group meeting. And that has happened where we do one Zoom and then they feel ready. The other thing for folks, I think rurally too, is no matter where you are. I mean, Mark, when we were driving, I was like, there's a lot of people here when we were in the UK. So obviously on the Canadian prairies, distance is a thing. And isolation is a factor when it comes to farmer mental well-being. And this has created opportunities to do this virtually, has created opportunities for producers that they may not have otherwise had to talk about these things, because they can now do it virtually and they don't. So I mean, I talk to farmers from their combine, from their tractor. This afternoon, I'm going to do a check-in. I facilitated a meeting between father and son. They've got a lot of work that they're doing. I think they're making silage, but we're going to do a quick check-in through Zoom. So he can just stop in his second office. That's what I refer to as the truck or the vehicle, and we can have a quick chat. Ideally, in this situation, yeah, I think the face-to-face contact is really important. It's just not always available. And so this creates new opportunities for farmers and ranchers that they would not have otherwise had, and for us as facilitators to be able to do this.
It also works in reverse, Mark, because we have a situation from our time in the UK where we have coaching clients now in Scotland and England because they came to meet us face to face at the seminar and then understood how the toolbox that we have can really serve them. And now we still communicate with them across the pond.
How do you pick up the quiet ones? I mean, we've got a couple of daughters. I mean, one daughter, if she's upset, will come right at you. The second one, however, goes very, very quiet. And I've seen entire families do that. How do you break that sort of wall of silence?
Well, there's two ways of looking at silence. The folks who wrote Crucial Conversations, a very classic book on communication, said that silence is actually a form of violence. But if your daughter was very silent with me, I would suspect that her style of communication is to process things, and so that she needs more information and more time to think things through. And one of the tools that we help to break the silence is the power of a letter. So for you as a dad to write your daughter a letter and say, "Dear daughter, I'm just curious what you're needing and what you're wanting from us as parents, because it seems to be hard to have you express openly what you're wanting. So mom and I are getting our affairs in order, and we'd like to ask you, what does fairness look like to you, and what do you need in your current reality to be successful?" And you deliver that to your daughter, and then she gets to process that, Mark. But at the end of the letter, you said, "I'd like to have a chat about this at tea on Sunday of the end of September," or whatever you want to do. And what it does is it recognizes that people communicate in different ways. And at the seminar, Lydia will be explaining idea communication, which is my son. He's the big idea guy. My husband is very brief, very concise, sometimes doesn't use enough words. He's an action communicator. But your daughter seems to be the type who doesn't want to make a mistake or wants to know that things are in a very ABC orderly fashion, and she will not think on her feet. So she needs time to process what her responses are going to be. And that's also the power of an agenda when we get a co-facilitated meeting. So when we do the 2-hour family meetings, once we've talked to everyone individually, the whole goal of that meeting is to draw out. So what's your daughter's name, Mark?
Jessica.
So I'd say, "Jessica, I'm just curious, after the things you and I have talked about privately, what is it that you want your mom and dad to really understand? Go ahead."
You used a word there that it just jumped straight out at me, because I think the concept of fairness is seriously underrated. I mean, people think it's something that happens and, it's important in the playground, and after that, forget it. But it is really, really important to adults too, because something that's perceived as being unfair can rankle for years and years and years.
And the rankling makes people sick, makes them anxious, and makes them litigious. For those listeners who want to delve more on this before they come to the seminars in Scotland, is you can go to YouTube to Farm Family Coach and watch my 1-hour thing called Finding Fairness. So all you have to remember is go to YouTube, Finding Fairness in Farm Transition. And Mark, it was the first time I ever presented, and I was asked specifically to talk about fairness. I had 350 Albertans in the crowd with their cell phones, and they are texting me their personal scenarios. And our script for this is, first thing has to be financial transparency. So that's why we also want to talk about attitudes around money and what your intent is as a parent and a founder. And also, what are you going to do with the rebels, the people that no matter how much wealth or success or opportunity you cascade to that adult child, it's just never enough. And so we talk about greed and entitlement. And that's where my Irishness comes out in terms of having the ability in our practice, Mark, to talk about the things, the bull in the middle of the room, that are always avoided, but are what you say, rankling or niggling at people, or pinch points, we call them, that never get satisfied. And I have also said very strongly, a farm is not a piece of pie. It can't be chopped up and divvied out, because then there's no critical mass to have a farm anymore. And with the current scenario in the UK, with the economics changing and all the pressures financially, that is a very significant piece that needs to be understood by both the non-farm and farming heirs. And so we have a very clear map, so to speak, on how we speak about fairness.
Lydia, if you've got to this situation and you are presenting or trying to lead people towards or allow them to find their own way towards a course of action, some people are going to be sitting there thinking, no, that's not what I had in mind at all. That's different. how do you demonstrate to them that different is not necessarily wrong? Different sometimes is just different.
I'd be so curious to know what they're thinking. Like now that you've planted this like hypothetical, I'm like, oh, like I wonder what they're thinking. Part of it is their story. Different is not bad. It is different. And culturally, people do things differently also in different places. And we're talking about, for example, we're talking about the concept of fairness, and Elaine mentioned financial transparency. One of the things that we like to explore with people is what is your money script? Because mine is different than yours. Mine isn't necessarily bad. It may not be serving me, but it's not, there's no judgment around it. And so when people are like, oh, that's not what I had in mind at all, when it can be hard to pull out of a workshop unless people want to be open and transparent. When we're doing facilitation, my curiosity would be like, what did you have in mind? What is workable for you? What could the next steps be? What are you hoping for? We do not predetermine the outcome when we're working with folks. We know where some of the tension points are and where some of the, for example, lack of fairness. And Mark, you said it. We talk about it on the playground and then we become adults and we're not talking about it. The concept of lack of fairness across the board, whether it's in like, it doesn't have to be just in agriculture, is a major source of conflict in workplaces, in homes, in relationships. And financial transparency, again, that's a difficult one to talk about. And so, yeah, if I were working with folks, I would say, I want to know more about what you're thinking. And then we could see in the context of what your goals are, what's possible. We're not predetermining that you must transition this farm. Sometimes we work with people who say, look, I didn't have in mind that I want to transition the farm, but my kids think that I'm just going to give it to them. And I actually need money to live. And so we say, okay, founders, we need to talk about you and your goals first. So it's an interesting question, Mark, because when people say, look, that's not what I had in mind, and I want to do things differently, part of the work is to explore with them in a place that's free of judgment and really full of curiosity. What are your options? What's possible for you? And one of the things we say to our colleagues, other farmers all over the place is, look, you're not alone and you're not without options. What we need to figure out is, what do you want and what's possible for the future? This can be harder with young farmers because sometimes they don't feel like they have the control over equity and finance to make any decisions at all. And so, Elaine, sometimes we're suggesting to people, like, you need to read books or get the skills that you would need to help you step away if you have to into the future, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, Mark. It
does, but it to a certain extent it raises another one, which is that you say you have choices, you have options. Is that always true? Are there occasions where actually, sorry, you've just left this too late?
The concept of too late is interesting. It reduces certain options that you might have, but it doesn't mean you're without option. And the reason I mention this kind of quite specifically, Mark, is because I've done a lot of training in mental health first aid and suicide skills intervention training. And I think what happens is people feel like they've hit a wall and there's nothing they can do. And perhaps on the tact side, as far as like execution of accounting, or like, yes, maybe you have limited options, but you have other things that you could do. That, Elaine, you can go ahead. That may be a bit abstract.
The other thing is, you need to know about us, Mark, is we're both wired for positivity and possibility. So we always think that there's a solution. You just haven't found it yet, and we will help you get there. The other thing I want listeners to understand while they're listening to this is, in the seminars that Lydia is going to be doing in Scotland, and I'll be dropping into part of that, is that people will be able to engage with Lydia through the WhatsApp, through their mobile cell phones. And this is where it becomes a huge learning opportunity, because you will find out that, somebody said they need 80,000 pounds or whatever to live a year, or 40, or whatever the number is. And it's a learning opportunity to see that you're not alone, but also that there's a wide variety of what people's solutions are to these outcomes that they're seeking, Mark. And people come away from the workshop and they go, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And the reason you didn't have any idea is because you never had a forum before to sit and to share and to understand and to hear other people's stories, but to not be threatened about your privacy, because the way we work is very safe and respectful, without judgment, with lots of curiosity. And because Lydia's been doing this work for quite a while, and I've been doing it for over 3 decades, and if you've coached 1,000 families like I have, you've seen all different possibilities, Mark. And so there's no one right way where the outcome might find a solution.
I suspect I already know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. What is the best time to start succession planning?
Well, my son is 7. He's got his money jars already. I'm like, okay, so here's where you save, and you're going to use that to build equity. Like I'm trying to get the financial piece kind of in play because I'll tell you, Mark, my husband and I, we're first generation. So we are plowing all of our money into this farm. And we do not have a lot of personal wealth set aside at this point, and I'm 40 years old. And so we know that if our son wants to farm, he will have to fund some, I mean, I don't know what the next 30 years hold, but he will potentially have to fund some of our retirement. My husband said to my son not too long ago, hey, maybe one day you could build a house here. I'm like, no, no, do not say that to him at 7. Like that one day he might be able to like have a piece of this farm. But because this is our business and we need to be able to make a financial plan that could potentially actually make that possible into the future. And he's 7. But what we need to teach him right now is financial literacy. And we need to be clear about what we can talk about, that we are open, that he can ask questions, that we can share our own finances in a way that a 7-year-old can understand. And in our transition, Mark, so we started a business. We built our business. We built a direct-to-consumer beef business. We're working with another farmer now who sold us land. So he sold us our first land and he holds the mortgage for it. So he's helping to facilitate our transition into agriculture as well from his equity that he has. And he moved from Scotland to Canada in the early aughts, so early 2000s. And we are now kind of in a non-family transition with him. So we are learning on the fly as we go, what are the conversations that need to have? And then we can kind of relay appropriate information to our son. So I mean, what I'm trying to say is I don't think any time is too early. Part of what happens is people they may not approach their farm from from a business perspective. So they may not have the language to be able to communicate it with their next gen. So I say early and often that Elaine and having the right language and having the skills to know even what to talk about can be helpful.
So for the older farmers listening to them, Mark, this podcast, I want them right now today to take a piece of paper and put the farm assets on the left-hand side and put their personal wealth bubble on the right-hand side. And for some people, that personal wealth bubble is really small. And for older farmers like me, it's humiliating to come to my children and say, I'd really like to transfer assets to you, but mom and I are not going to have enough for the next 20 years. And also we have all this debt that I don't want you to take on as a younger farmer. Well, that's why talking about money is not going to kill you. And talking about money is a really good skill to have because it is clear data as to what the opportunities and flexibility might be. It also speaks to culture. So for Lydia's son being 7 and my grandchildren living next door to me being 8, 6, and 5, someone asked him, Reed, are you going to be a farmer when you grow up? And he looked dumbfounded and he said to this person, no, I already am a farmer. He's 5 years old. And that's another piece that we explain is about culture. The culture of your farm is what do you believe? What are your values around money? What do you believe about honesty, teamwork, challenge, and all those good things? The second thing is how are you behaving with each other? Because those of you who are being silent and holding everything inside close to the chest, you're a bomb waiting to go off, or you're a closed book, and we have to open up that book so that we can understand how we can create solutions because Lydia and I cannot deal with assumptions. And we do a lot of assumption busting because conversations you go, I had no idea. That's amazing to me. I'm surprised. Well, that's the good outcome of having more open communications. And then the third piece, besides believe, behave, is decide. And herein lies the rub, Mark. How many succession seminars or podcasts have you been to and done? You see, that's the problem. Talk does not cook rice. So you can take in all this lovely information, but the magic spot is when you actually start acting and executing the tools you have at your disposal. So we'll get pretty Irish on people in terms of saying, look, you haven't called me in 6 months. I gave you homework. I wanted you to check those compensation worksheets. I wanted you to give me a number for what you need to live on. I needed you to check in with a financial planner to see how you can work on building some more personal wealth, even though that's been a struggle because everything's been going back into the farm, and you've done nothing? Okay.
I think we'll round it up there. I find that fascinating, the whole concept of it. It is so rich in common sense. It's astonishing to me that it hasn't happened many years previously. And it's been a real pleasure talking to you both, Elaine and Lydia. Thank you both for your time.
And we hope to see you in Scotland.
Thank you.
Elaine Froese and Lydia Carpenter. And just to remind you that the Undiscussabull workshops are being held in the Mansfield Hotel Elgin on the 3rd of November, the Radston Hotel in Lark Hall on the 5th, and in the RHS Pavilion Ingliston on the 7th of November. You can register for any of those events by visiting the Monitor Farm Scotland website and sign up using Eventbrite. And as they said, Lydia's going to be here in Scotland in person, and Elaine will join digitally via Zoom or something of the kind. As they also said, the best time to start this discussion is now. A constructive, open conversation is always better than a rammy. And if you can make it to one of the workshops, Elaine and Lydia will be able to offer you some excellent professional guidance. I'm sure it will be well worth your time. In our next episode, we continue the theme of succession planning and how best to get these conversations going when I talk to agricultural advisor Heather Wildman. I hope you found this podcast useful and that you can join me for the next episode. I'm Mark Stephen. Until the next time, thanks for listening.